Welcome to Wake Up and Live with Christopher Flake. Tune in each day as Pastor Chris shares a short inspirational message of encouragement on a variety of topics. So wake up and live empowered, blessed, loved. Now let's listen to today's message.
Good morning. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know, all this started again this week, just continuing on, talking about the awesome love of God. You know, if you and I dwell in this incredible love of God and believe that He's told us through His Word that we shouldn't want to be or even able to contain it. You know, God's love should just overflow. It should be so in and through us that it just can't help but spill out on other people around us. And love, true, actual, without strings attached, can really change lives. I mean, you never know what a single act of kindness could do for someone. You never know what one action of love could really mean for someone going through a tough time. You know, and I guess I really never understood this until I met Chris. I mean, it was a hot and a muggy summer day, and I was visiting the mall for some reason I can't remember, or get a pair of shoes or something, or meet up with friends. And, you know, as I headed back toward my car, I saw someone just leaning against this tree to my right, and it was a person trying to find relief in the shade. And he was an older gentleman holding a small sign that read, "Anything helps." And normally I would have handed him $5 bill and just continued on my merry way, but, you know, God had other plans that day. You know, the man that sat there in the sun that day wearing these tattered clothes and shoes that looked like they were almost worn out and a backpack that seemed too small really to be useful. His eyes were somber and his skin just really looked like leather, and he just seemed so fragile. And it was easy to see that he was homeless and in need of some help, and I suspected that he hadn't had a warm meal in a long time. And I had probably been to that mall thousands of times, and while I've seen many others looking for small handouts, I didn't recognize this man. And you know, as I continued toward my car, I tried to justify ignoring him. It's not that I didn't care about him or his needs. I just told myself that I was too busy to stop and that I'd make sure I'd pray for him later. And it's such a silly and immature response, especially when someone who calls himself a follower of Jesus. But we all do this, don't we? We yearn for God to use us, but then we justify why we can't engage in the opportunities He sends our way because they're not quite convenient. When life is relatively easy and comfortable, as it is for many of us who are Christians in America, we tend to lean more on our comforts than on the love of God. We want Jesus, but on our time. We want to be used, but only in ways we feel comfortable with. I mean, we want to change the world, but we need to take care of our own needs first. However, living out of the love pushes us out of our comfort zone. Suddenly, we start to seeing people as God sees them, and we just can't pass by. But while I tried to get into my car without addressing the man leaning against the tree, something powerful impressed on my heart and really redirected my steps toward him. You know, and I said, "Hey there," and I smiled and extended my hand, and the man looked at me with a little confusion and said, "Hello there," and you know, and he seemed to struggle to stretch out his hand to me, and I noticed how mangled and malformed his hand looked, and he later told me it was because of a combination of war injuries and progressive muscular dystrophy, and I asked him for his name and how he was this day, and I figured that talking to him was good enough for today's mission. When I was done, I could be on my way back home and feel good about what I had done. But God told me I wasn't going to get off this easy. My heart needed to change perspective. He says, "My name is Chris," the man said, and it's short for Christopher. And I said, "Man, my name's Christopher too, right?" I told him, I said, "But I got, it's part of the thing. We just both felt this small connection in sharing a first name. And I could see that something as simple as that created a bit of trust between us." You know, Chris was almost 80 years old and had been homeless for the last 20 of those years. I mean, he lost his job shortly after returning home from the war. Years later, his wife died of cancer, and they had no children he could rely on for help. He was alone, and his only option was to live on the streets, and it broke me to hear this. He said, I've lived this way for a long time, but I'm getting too old to do this now, he said. And he explained that he'd received a small check in the mail each month for his time of serving in the military during the Vietnam War, but that it wasn't really enough for him to even rent the worst apartments in this Portland area. I mean, he couldn't even move into a different state because of his health and his age. And he just said, I'm kind of stuck with his, his eyes were just kind of half closed. And I asked him what I could do to help. New clothes, some money, a place to sleep for the night. And Chris said, you know what? Because of my health, I could really use one of those cheap prepaid phones for emergencies. Nothing fancy other than that. I'm really okay until I find a cheap enough place to rent. I said, perfect, I can do that, I said. And I made my way back into the mall when I purchased one of those $10 prepaid phones and activated it and got him some new socks, a few shirts, and some other necessities I thought I could use. And after I'd made my way back to the big tree he was lying under, he looked at me with this big old smile and he said, what on earth did you get? And I put my number in the phone and handed it to him and then explained that the other things that I had gotten him. And I asked if there was anything else I could do or somewhere I could take him. I offered to let him shower at my place, and he insisted that he had everything he needed and that his little makeshift tent underneath here would be perfectly fine for the time being. I mean, he had friends there. They take care of one another. Before we said our goodbyes, I prayed over him and told him to call me if he ever needed anything, and I promised that I would help in any way I could. And after hugging it out, we just said our goodbyes and we just went our separate ways. And about a month later, I find myself once again at that place in that mall, and I'd been there a few times since, but never seen him, but he was just really nowhere to be found. And as I walked in the front doors, I passed a tree where Chris had found comfort in the shade, and I decided to take a moment to relax and sit there myself. And I prayed for him and for his health and asked God if he could give me some way to make sure he was all right. Maybe he's found an apartment, I thought, and then maybe he got hurt, and I had texted him a few times and tried to call him initially after we met, but he never answered, and I assumed he was all right and he would know to call me if he really drastically happened or needed me. So I got it up and started to make my way toward the mall, and suddenly this scrawny gray-haired man approached me, and it was Chris, and he was wearing this hat and one of the shirts I had given him. And I said, Chris, I called across the parking lot, and he didn't recognize me at first, but till I was about 10 feet away, and he said, hey, you, I was wondering when I'd run into you again. And I explained I was wondering the same thing and asked how he was doing. He shook his head. You'll never guess what happened. He said, the night that you got that cell phone and the clothes, I had a heart attack underneath the bridge. And none of my friends were back yet, and I didn't know what to do. Then I remembered you had got me that phone, and I dialed 911. I mean, I literally had no words. I mean, you've got to be kidding. I was thinking, man. He says, I told the operator where I was, and they picked me up, and within a few minutes, I was in the hospital for more than a week. He said, I almost died that night. That phone saved my life. You saved my life, and I have no idea how to repay you. And I said, repay me? I'm just glad you're all right, man. That is totally a God thing. Don't thank me, thank him. And and he laughed, and he just wanted to thank you and take noticing me, and you could have ignored me that day, but you didn't. And Chris then told me he had gotten into a program that helped homeless veterans to find affordable housing, and because of his age and health conditions, he had been placed in the home within a matter of days. And my connection with Chris is one of those experiences that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Why? Because it showed me so vividly how a single act of living out really God's love. Something as simple as noticing someone, stopping and giving them a $10 prepaid phone can be the difference between life and death. Every act of love has a drastic impact on the world around us. Every act of love is an act against death. By following God and loving the people around us, we are offering them life-giving oxygen, the change to see and know God's love for themselves and those around them. You never know what people are going through, how broken they are, or how in need of a simple hello. Love doesn't have to be extravagant. It just has to be love. Remember, when the love of God fills our lives, it just should overflow. Every ounce of who we are should yearn to help and love those around us. When we learn to put aside our own selfish agenda and comforts, instead embracing God's agenda of love, the world will become a better place, one filled with compassion and understanding. And I'm reminded of a quote by Francis Chan, who said, "I believe he wants us to love others so much that we go to extremes to help them." You see, we all need to ask ourselves some questions. What are we doing to show the world a tangible and active example of God's love? Has the love of God so filled our lives that we can't help but show it to others? Are we taking advantage of the opportunities God has put before us to love our neighbors? Or are we ignoring people in need because of selfishness or our desires for comfort? These are tough questions, but living out love should define our lives when we grasp God's love for us. Love should change the way we interact with people around us. It should change everything about us. I don't share about Chris to try to convince you that I'm sort of incredible person who has got this love thing figured out. But I wanted to show you that when we elevate God's yearning to love on a pedestal higher than ourselves, incredible and beautiful things can happen. I'm struck by a beautiful underlining meaning in Chris's prepaid phone that served as a lifeline. Jesus' death on the cross paid and prepaid for any debts we owe. His death and resurrection are our lifelines. Jesus went to the cross knowing we don't deserve that kind of forgiveness, but love meant that he did it anyway. Because of this, we are the same kind of love to others. No matter where you are or what it may look like, just love. Take time to pause and extend a hand to people who may need it. Leave money on the mailbox of that person who can't make his or her rent. Pay for the lunch of a family in line behind you. Fix the flat of a tire of a person on the side of the road. Buy a cheap little phone for someone who needs a lifeline. Do it all with love. You never know what something as simple as a conversation or a prepaid cell phone could do in someone's life. And opportunities are everywhere. You and I just need to grab a hold of them. So today, as you wake up and live, empowered, blessed, and loved by God, extend that same love to the people around you. Sometimes you just got to take a moment and take your eyes off yourself and place them on somebody else. Trust me, they're all around us every day we walk by them. And allow the greatness of God's love to pour out you onto other people's. Trust me, you will see something that you've never seen before, and you will be so blessed and so touched, your life will totally change. So again, I thank you for listening and tuning in today. I pray and hope that God would bring people into your lives, that you could pour out the love of Jesus upon them so that their lives in turn could pour it out on other people's. Let's keep paying it forward. Today there will be opportunities for you. They're out there. Take advantage of them. Seize it so that you can recognize the love of God like you never have before. God bless, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Today's podcast was sponsored by North Texas Muscle Therapy, your non-invasive pain management specialists. Schedule a massage with Drew Davis online at www.ntmtwf.com. Tell him Mike sent you and receive $10 off your first visit.
Thank you for listening. Join us again tomorrow for another inspiring message. Remember to also listen to Sunday morning sermon series on the seasons of life. Also check out all of Pastor Chris's messages at wakeupandlive.life.